There's a sty on the eye, on the fly, on the wart, on the frog, on the bump, on the log, on the hole in the bottom of the sea. There's a sty on the eye of the fly, on the wart, on the frog, on the bump, on the log, in the hole in the bottom of the sea. There's a sty, there's a sty, there's a sty on the eye, on the fly, on the wart, on the frog, on the bump, on the log, in the hole in the bottom of the sea. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Zareth Prevails. We're going to talk about things that are better in 3v3 and aren't better in 3v3. There's 6 of them, and 5 of them, respectively. I actually snuck in a few generalizations, so help me mount the algorithm, guys. Hit that thumbs up button. Subscribe if you haven't already. Make a comment in the comments, etc. We're going to mount it, guys, but we don't have time. We got to go. We got to move. Let's talk about 3v3 though, because it's important. It's important stuff. So, if I can push the right button, we'll get on our way, shall we? Whoa, madness. We're in the game? Who told us we'd be in the game? Okay, here are the generalized ideas, guys. And this is super simple, so we're going to keep it really quick here. So, Galactic Legends are better in 3s because they're overpowered already. The CG has already told us that they want them to be overpowered in a way. That's their expectations, and there's just less things to kill them with. It's obvious. They're better in 3v3. That's just how it is. There's a reason why I decided I needed to get a couple GLs for my alt account in the first place, because in 3s, it's just a lot harder to kill GLs without your own GL. Taunt is better in 3v3 than in 5v5 because 5v5 you have more tools to be able to dispel things. You can casually dispel taunt. You can bypass it in other ways. You can do all this stuff. In 3v3, it's much tougher to ignore that. If one person is taunting, a lot of times you don't have the mechanics to be able to just ignore it. Or if you do, it's nice. It's very nice. In which case, we have this. Ignore taunt is really nice. Especially Beskar Mando, man. People want to hide in stealth. He just ignores it. It's super nice. I mean, it's nice in 5s, but you notice it a lot more in 3s because those taunts are pervasive. You note that I got lazy here. After I was in Scoundrels, I was like, oh, we'll just keep pushing Bounty Hunter buttons. So I didn't, and then I was like, you know what? Okay, fine. We'll add Jedi Revan because he can mark people. Ignore, this isn't an obviously max list, but then generally Omega is not better in 3s than in 5s. she sucks, actually. Okay, so here's the things, guys. Here's the less obvious stuff. So first off, extortion works really nicely as the lead. Newt distributes that extortion really nicely, and he takes so many more turns if you make him kind of fast, and your opponents are like, man, I only get 3 turns, like 3 characters, like they think they can ignore it, but the effects of extortion are just so pervasive. They're so powerful, guys. In 3v3, Newt is a monster. He is so much better than in 5v5, and so all this stuff about extortion, like, yes, you're not getting as much speed and potency while everyone has extortion, but you're much more likely to just get people stuck on extortion anyways. So, very good mechanic in 3s that doesn't quite translate to the magic, to the same kind of magic in 5s, just because in 5s there's more ways to manage it, and more ways to manage Newt, for that matter. In 3v3, it's just, this team ends up being ridiculously strong unless you have something specific to deal with it. Next up is Stunlock. Stunlock is very powerful in 3s, because in 5s it's like, okay, so you can stun a character, and that's nice, but a lot of people have cleanses, there's a lot of more things that you can react to, and different mechanics to have to worry about in 5s. In 3s, it's like, you can stun the whole team. Like, this Asajj Daka Spirit team is really fun to play, because Asajj can stun on her basic 50% of the time, but it's still 50% of the time it works every time. Old Daka can stun 2 people at a time. Spirit can stun someone with her special, and then your opponents just don't get turns. Similarly, I like this whack-a-mole team with Jedi Luke, because I took Yoda. Who cares who the third is, as long as it's a Jedi? You just keep calling Ayla to assist, and on her basic, she stuns every time. Maybe it's in her unique that says that. She stuns her target for 1 turn every time she critically hits. So load her up with some crit hit, percentage and just go to town. She just starts stunning people. And if people can't take turns, then obviously you're eventually going to win. Stun locking is extremely powerful. Now, one mechanic that I think is something that, man, I love this because, okay, so Chewie, normally you can't really choose who he's going to guard. Like he guards the weakest, so he guards Han and then whoever has the lowest health plus protection added together. In threes, it's just always on by default on the third person, so you can people put this team early on with Rey, and it's like you can't crit Rey, you can't do all these different things to Rey because Chewie doesn't allow it. Chewie's guard is just too strong, guys. And so, whereas I don't think that's the strongest team anymore. In fact, it just isn't the strongest team. Putting it on a character like Bando is really strong, or on Dash, or whoever. I mean, you could put a tank there, and they still can't, if they're guarded, they can't be crit, they can't be stunned, and all of this stuff. And so, I love this combo so much just because if you're taking out a tougher team, they can't be dazed, then Chewie really protects them really nicely in threes. In fives, it's like, well, you can't choose certain characters unless you want to go undersize or something. So put it on defense, this team is crazy. Keep it on offense, it's also very nice. It's very, very flexible mechanic. All right, so control teams. I was tempted at first to just show you guys like the Thridian team, which is just, Thrawn lead with Gideon and Stormtrooper, but I just want to point out that teams that can control the situation are much more effective in threes because there are fewer characters to kind of manipulate and manage. So, I mean, Grand Admiral Thrawn with his fracture takes out 1/3 of your opponent's power, and you can just choose a lot of times because there's not as many tanks or whatever. Or if they do have tanks, you have to find ways to bypass it. But control teams are just really strong. I mean, Thrawn with Traya combined is extremely potent in threes. Like you can use those two plus Nihilus to slowly take out a team, one by one, because those two shut down two characters, and then Nihilus just kind of does his thing over time. So, really, really nice to have control teams in 3v3. As opposed 5v5, I mean, it's nice too. It just takes more doing because there's more ways to break free. There's more ways for something to go wrong. In general, though, man, these control characters are just really powerful, especially if you craft the right teams. Now, odd synergy is one that I really love about threes, actually, guys. This Darth Vader team with Zalbar and Mission is... I'm not saying that it's broken, that it's wonderful, that it's, ridiculously strong, but it is much stronger. You don't see people in the top levels running Vader with Zalbar Mission in fives because the other two characters matter too much, and the synergy just kind of collapses. But the thing is, Mission and Zalbar both generate damage over time. They both heal health and protection based off of how much damage over time is out there, and Vader also heals his health and protection based off of damage over time, and he keeps those dots around. So these three together are really nice. Like if you had to run the same team in 5v5, people would just run it over with overwhelming damage per second, DPS, or they'd be able to find a way. This team doesn't have legs in 5v5 unless it's against a really weak team, but in threes, it works against some teams at least, because Zalbar has that passive taunt, Mission just hangs out in stealth, and then hopefully Vader is doing his Vader thing and getting all slicey with people. So, I mean, weird synergy teams work in threes. 5v5, they can, but it's not as good. Now, the Akbar Omicron, this is one thing that, I mean, in theory it works better. I'm not really sure for it. I'm not 100%. I don't even have his Omicron on my main account, as you can see, though I do have it on my second account, my Professor X account. So, I mean, the thing is, I love Stormtrooper Han's taunt. It is overpowered. It is so good for a lot of reasons. So he taunts, when he taunts, the other allies gain 30% turn meter. That's super nice. In addition, all other allies gain 20% turn meter when he's damaged while his taunt is active. So actually, that would even include if he's taunting and he takes damage over times, every time he's damaged. So it doesn't matter how he's damaged as long as he's damaged. The thing is, in fives, this gets dispelled immediately, and it's like a 4 cooldown. And it's not really that addressed even by Akbar's Omicron, because it just says, it calls like his leadership calls a random ally to assist. In this, with his Omicron though, it orders it more. The two other weakest allies are called to assist, and that's added health and protection, like we kind of mentioned earlier. So if you want him to go, if you want Han Solo to go, or Stormtrooper Han to go in 5s, like you have to make him weaker than like everyone basically, and so that doesn't work. But here's the thing though, in 3s you can do this, and the reason why you want him to keep being called to assist is not because his basic is so powerful, though there are powerful elements to it, but the awesome thing is the allies who assisted have their cooldowns reduced by 1. And so if you have Leia and Akbar doing their specials all the time and calling Stormtrooper Han to assist, then he is consistently going to be taunting. So you dispel this taunt, the next turn he goes, he's just going to do it again and again and again. And you know, in 5s you can't really choose to do that. In 3s this is going to work every time. I don't know about that, but I mean, there's also the chance that at 70% chance every time he goes, he's going to gain 35% turn meter. So I don't know, just really interesting stuff here, folks, that these guys are all going to be calling each other to assist every single turn almost, and they're not going to have to use basics at all unless they're assisting. So really interesting synergy there. It's almost like that Omicron was made for 3v3. Not really sure though. So 5 things that don't really work that well in 3v3 compared to 5v5. So 501st has a couple setbacks. So first off, you're only taking 3 characters. General Skywalker is going to get a little bit worse. So, you know, his main stuff, his leadership doesn't change at all. But his unique, or is it his other unique? Here it is. So at the start of battle, he gains 25% defense, extra max protection, extra tenacity for each other 501st ally. And so in 5v5, that works real nice because he's gaining it from 4 other 501st characters. In this case, he's only gaining it from 2 other, and it's different. I mean, obviously, he has reduced stats just because it's 3v3. Otherwise, Rex is another one who gains less speed, and for that matter, all 501st allies get less quick because he's gaining 4% speed for each 501st ally present. So he goes from plus 20% speed, and that goes for all of the clones. He instead of gaining plus 20% speed, he gains plus 12% speed, which, I mean, is not a completely horrible thing, I suppose, but it's just not as good. He's not as fast, and his team isn't as fast. Similarly, 5s, when he sacrifices, he'd only go if he's with other clones. If he's with 2 other clones, then 2 of them get his stat boost from his sacrifice, and otherwise, if he's with General Skywalker, only 1 clone benefits from his sacrifice, which is a lot of times going to be Rex, and Rex doesn't care as much about it. So just not as good in 3v3 as in 5v5. Similarly, quantity-based mechanics don't work as well. So you have Darth Vader, who has Merciless Massacre. It's on 9 cooldown. And a lot of times you can in 3v3 or 5v5, you can rotate through. There are actually mechanics, there are tricks in place to make it so that Vader actually can just cycle through his Merciless Massacre from one to another, because every time he takes a turn and hits someone, then it takes his cooldown down by 1. In 3v3, he has fewer opponents to be able to hit, so he can't cycle through Merciless Massacre nearly as easily. He has other good things about himself in 3s, but that's one thing that's worse. Jedi Knight Revan and his leadership, very similar to how it works on that Rex team. His speed and his entire team speed is going to be diminished because he can only have 3 characters on the team instead of 5, and all of his speed on the entire team is based off of his the total number of Jedi, and so he's going to be less fast, less quick, and that's okay, but that means he's going to be at a disadvantage sometimes. Instead of being plus 40 speed, a lot of times he'll be plus, sometimes plus 30, plus 25. It's not a hugely crippling thing, but it can matter, guys. Mandalorian, for his disintegrate, it's just tougher to get him disintegrate because you have to take more actions, you have to do more things. You can't just make him the slowest and then suddenly he gets his disintegrate on his first turn. That doesn't work that way. In 3s, it takes a little bit of work. It's still a really powerful ability, but it does take more work. Palpatine similarly with his leadership, because of all the debuffs and everything. Some of the characters that he's with are going to be able to cycle through and get 100% turn meter based off of this stuff, but if you're only causing 3 debuffs, they're only gaining 60% turn meter, and that can cause issues. So Palpatine is one. I mean, his lead is still probably pretty good in 3s, but it's limited, more limited. And Droideka, he's just going to take, his opponents are going to take fewer turns because there's less characters. So if you're trying to get a ton of stacks, he just doesn't get as many stacks. That's all. He can still be good in other ways, like his speed is still really good to jumpstart Maul, etc. General Grievous, guys, is just not nearly as good in 3s. But a lot of that's because of the target lock synergy. He really benefits from having a whole team going, taking turns, gaining a bunch of turn meter based off of target lock. There are fewer characters who can get target lock and fewer characters who can hit the target lock with AoEs. Therefore, he's going to be a lot slower and a lot more vulnerable. And it makes me sad, but he's just a shadow of himself, a pale shadow at that, in 3v3. Stat sharing in 3v3 is a little bit diminished. So you have Mon Mothma, whose leadership pools all of the different characters' combined stats with max health, max protection, offense, defense, potency, etc. And then it shares it out. Everyone gets 8% of that total pool, and that's super nice in 3v3, or sorry, in 5v5. In 3s, you only have a much smaller pool of candidates, and so like Kyle Katarn, for instance, would have, like, he really likes having a ton of offense, and he's getting a lot less offense from his friends. Like, 8% doesn't sound like a lot, but it really does add up quite a bit. And if you're missing 2 of those characters from the squad, it's just really going to impact you in a big way. It's a lot of the reason why I like to run Cassian and K2 with them, because you're relying on other mechanics, not that stat share. Jupio is similar. He's grabbing stats from the leader, and and then he shares it out to the rest of the team, but he only shares it out to one other character other than the leader, so just not as impactful. Rey has her lifeblood thing where she cuts herself for 25% health, and she gives bonus protection to everyone. Now, I'm not implying that Rey is weak in 3v3. Far from it. She's actually probably a little bit better, but things that require stat share is just diminished. So Lifeblood, not as strong in 3v3, though I guess it scales pretty well. It's probably the worst example of the 3, honestly. And then finally, guys, mass assists from this team, from any of these teams. Iden Versio, she's still going to be good in 3v3 for sure, but she's not going to have the crazy amount of damage that she does initially. Like, I think, like, Wampa doesn't need a ton of tenacity now in 3v3. You can just put a lot of health down, and even if she does stun him right away, he's probably going to survive a couple barrages worth of hits from the Iden team. I'm not completely sure about that, but she's not going to be as good because she doesn't have as many people assisting. I mean, it's common sense, guys. Maul is going to be worse because, yeah, especially if you have like a Watt or Droideka or something to jumpstart him, they're not going to be assisting either, and so the people who are assisting are just not going to do as much damage. Like, I know that typically I lean on Jango to help him in 5v5 to do extra damage, and every time he goes, he hits. Yes, that's all very hard hitting, but in 5s, a lot of that is supplemented by damage from Jango, damage from Bo-Katan, all these relic characters that are assisting him. And in 3s, he's not going to have as many people assisting him, especially if he needs people to help him get jump started. So not as strong there. Mon Mothma, obviously, you have the mass assists, but all those mass assists are just doing paper cuts, and you're doing 2 fewer paper cuts every time. It really adds up, or rather, it just doesn't. It doesn't add up at all. So, anyways, those are mine. That's my list, guys. Let me know what yours is. I'm sure that there are things that I missed. I would love to hear what you have to say. Thank you all so much for watching, and remember that in all things, Zareth prevails.